The sky cracks open. The storm rolled in without warning. Dark clouds churned above the jungle canopy of Velar Prime, flickering with unnatural green lightning. The scent of ionized air and wet foliage thickened as the winds picked up, carrying a rising whine that set every Kiraathi's antennae twitching in alarm. Aline clutched her larva child tighter against her thorax, her slender arms trembling. Talu, barely a month out of his egg, chirped nervously, sensing his mother's fear. They stood with the others near the village's edge, watching the sky break open. "It's not the season," whispered Elder Votha, his chitin pale with dread. "This storm is no natural thing." Aline didn't need an elder's warning. Her body knew, every muscle, every nerve, that something was wrong. The ground itself seemed to hum beneath their feet. The storm wasn't just wind and rain. It had a presence, a pulse. The sky split with a thundercrack like the tearing of the world. Suddenly, the warning horns blared, a low, mournful drone that meant only one thing: run. Panic surged. The villagers scattered like leaves in a gale. Aline turned, cradling Talu, and bolted toward the underground shelter hollowed beneath the central mound. The acid-tinged rain had started to fall, sizzling against her hardened shell. Behind her, trees cracked and groaned under pressure. A sudden shockwave hit, an invisible wall of force that sent her tumbling. She fell hard on the slick roots, arms flailing. Her grip slipped. Talu was torn from her grasp, bouncing into the underbrush with a tiny, terrified squeal. "No!" she screamed, crawling after him, her limbs scraped and stinging. But the wind doubled, and she couldn't see more than a few paces ahead. A blur of green mist, slashing branches, and static-laced air swallowed everything. She crawled, calling his name again and again, until her voice was ragged. Then, silence. The jungle had claimed him. She staggered to her feet and ran blindly toward the shelter. Behind her, branches cracked, trees groaned, and something metallic howled across the sky. She reached the hatch just as it was closing. Inside, warm arms pulled her in, slammed the hatch shut, and locked the storm outside. She collapsed to the floor, empty arms cradling only air. "Talu, my son." Hours passed. The storm raged on, unrelenting. The shelter lights flickered as surges of electricity raced through the ground. Villagers whispered prayers, their antennae drooping in grief. Everyone knew what happened to those lost outside during an ion storm. Aline sat in the corner, silent now. Her claws were bloody from scratching at the walls. She refused food. She refused words. She had nothing left. And then, a scream from near the hatch. The sentry, a young male barely out of his molt, stumbled backward from the viewing port. "There's," he gasped, "there's someone outside." "What?" Votha hissed, rising. No one could survive out there. But others were crowding now, peering through the narrow slit in the door. A silhouette stood in the swirling green fog, hunched and broad-shouldered. Not Kiraathi. Not anything they knew. A gleaming helmet caught the dim light. A thick suit of metal and cloth armor covered the figure's body. Tubes hissed softly at its back, and its left hand cradled a small bundle, wrapped in torn foliage and fabric. Aline surged forward, pressing her face to the glass. She knew that shape. That little coil of limbs and amber carapace. "Talu." Her scream was wordless. The sentry opened the door against all protocol. Acid-laced wind blasted in, but the figure stepped through, shielding the child. Its armor hissed and steamed, but it walked forward slowly, purposefully. The human, because it could be nothing else, gently placed Talu into Aline's trembling arms. She wept. The last one alive. 30 years. That's how long James Halden had survived on Velar Prime, long after humanity had gone dark. He stood in the rust-colored dusk, surveying the horizon through the scratched visor of his pressure-sealed helmet. The storm had passed, leaving destruction, acid scoring, and that too-familiar silence. Jungle trees lay twisted like bones. The air was still damp with ozone and death. James tapped the side of his helmet. The HUD flickered, stabilizing. Biosignature: juvenile life form. Status: weak but alive. Direction: east quadrant. Still faint. Still traceable. He started moving. His joints ached with every step. The suit had been state-of-the-art once, But now it was cobbled together with scraps, polymer mesh, and the stubbornness of a man who refused to die. The exoskeleton servos whined like old wolves. But it still moved. It still carried him forward. Just like he always did. He had crashed here during the collapse, when the human colonial relay network failed. No more warp gates. No more supply drops. No more Earth. Some colonies went feral. Others simply went silent. Velar Prime. Just another abandoned outpost in the long twilight of a once great species. But James didn't die. He fixed what could be fixed, repurposed what couldn't, and outlived all the odds. His survival was less about luck and more about one simple choice. You don't quit. Ever. He built a hidden outpost in the jungle, a salvaged habitat dome fused with alien flora, grown over like a relic. Inside, he maintained what tech he could, including a broken-down scanner tuned to non-human life signs. He had never interfered with the local alien species, the Kiraathi. Insectoid. Communal. Peaceful. They'd never seen him. Until now. The child's distress beacon had triggered during the storm. One chirp, brief and almost missed, but James caught it. He almost ignored it, thought it might be a sensor echo. But then he heard it again. Faint. Dying. That's when he grabbed his gear. Now, trekking through the jungle, he scanned the forest floor. Acid-scorched leaves. Broken stalks. Then, a smear of amber-colored ichor, like alien blood. He followed it. His breath slowed. There, half-buried under a fallen stalk tree, was the larval child. Small. Trembling. Alive. Gotcha, he murmured. The child's chitin was cracked in places. One leg was bent awkwardly. James checked the vitals. Heartbeat erratic, temperature dropping. If he didn't stabilize him now, it would be over. With practiced precision, James pulled a heat gel wrap from his side pouch and cocooned the larva. He set a nutrient drip into a soft vein along its thorax and gave a whisper of oxygen-enriched air through a microcanister, just enough to calm the little one's panicked gasps. The child stopped shivering. The heartbeat evened out. He was going to make it. The return trek was brutal. The storm's aftermath had made the terrain a death trap, slick vines, collapsing trees, toxic puddles. But James didn't hesitate. Each step felt heavier. His power cells were low. The biosuit's right leg had lost full articulation. His HUD blinked warnings like Christmas lights. O2 reserves, 28%. Joint strain critical. Exosuit cooling degraded. Didn't matter. James wasn't doing this for thanks. Or survival. He did it because a child needed saving. Because he was human. And humans didn't leave people behind. By the time the village lights appeared through the mist, James was limping badly. He stopped just outside the edge of the shelter mound. The child was stirring now, weak but breathing steadily. Figures were moving behind the hatch. He could see them through the viewport, tall, lithe insectoid shapes with wide eyes and twitching antennae. One of them, her, rushed forward, hands pressed to the glass, her mouth moving in desperate cries. James felt something shift inside him. A memory. Long buried. A time when he, too, had held someone small and fragile in his arms. He walked forward. They opened the door. The mother collapsed as she took her child from him. Cradled him like he was a miracle. And maybe he was. James didn't say a word. What could he say? Instead, he gave a short nod and turned to go. The storm had passed. But his journey wasn't over. There were still signals to follow. Still stars to chase. Still work to do. Human didn't speak. It simply nodded once, then turned back into the storm. Flesh and steel. The jungle groaned beneath the weight of the storm's aftermath. Branches bent like bones. Pools of acidic water shimmered with oil-slick colors. In the distance, the sky still rumbled, but the worst had passed. Aline gripped the edge of the shelter's hatch, her chest tight with confusion and awe. The human, the thing of myth, had disappeared into the mist without a sound, leaving only her child, safe and breathing. But she couldn't sit still. Not when her mind burned with questions. Not when her soul screamed for answers. She wrapped Talu close to her thorax, whispered a prayer, and left him in the care of the elder nurse. Then she did something no Kiraathi would dare. She followed the Stormwalker. The jungle resisted her. Mud sucked at her legs. Tangled roots tried to trip her at every turn. She pushed through anyway, determined. Her body was built for nurturing, not traveling. Her kind rarely ventured beyond the canopy edge. But the human had walked this same path, through the storm, through acid and darkness, and carried her child without hesitation. Why? She had to know. Elsewhere, James Halden moved through the underbrush like a machine. His suit was barely holding together. A red warning light pulsed on his forearm screen, thermal seal failing. He ignored it. He was nearly back to the hidden pod, the derelict human habitat he'd repurposed into a crude base. Half buried by vines and moss, it looked like a fallen relic. Inside were his supplies, his logs, his last link to humanity. But more importantly, his scanner. He needed to know where the orbital debris from the old satellite grid was falling. The last storm wasn't natural. It was triggered by decaying human tech from orbit, satellites powered by unstable fusion cores, abandoned when Earth fell silent. If even one of those cores crashed nearby, it could poison this world for generations. He had to stop it. He always had to fix what others left broken. Aline stumbled into the clearing, her legs aching. She spotted the strange structure nestled in the vines, smooth metal and glass, shaped unlike anything Kiraathi had ever made. A nest of forgotten steel. And there, bent over a glowing panel, was the human. She stepped closer, trembling. James spun, instinctively reaching for the plasma tool at his belt, then paused. His visor's cracked display identified the life form instantly. Same one from the shelter. Female. Kiraathi. Unarmed. He lowered his arm. Aline didn't speak. She didn't know how to. Her language was formed of chirps, clicks, scent tones. But her body, her eyes, said enough. She bowed her head. And James, after a long pause, did something he hadn't done in decades. He took off his helmet. Steam hissed from the seal. The cool, damp air kissed his weathered skin. His hair was streaked with gray. Scars marked his jaw. His eyes, tired, blue, human, met hers. No translator. No words. But somehow she understood. "You didn't have to," she whispered in her native tongue, knowing he wouldn't understand. "You chose to." James looked down, then pointed to her chest, where her claws had once cradled her son. Then to his own heart. Aline's antennae twitched. She reached into the satchel slung across her back and produced something, a worn, chitin-shelled seed used in Kiraathi culture as a symbol of deep gratitude. She placed it on the metal floor between them. James picked it up, turned it over in his gloved fingers. Something unspoken passed between them. Then the warning light blinked on his panel again. Orbital trajectory update. Impact in 72 hours. Distance, 82 kilometers. He cursed under his breath and moved to a panel on the wall, pulling up a flickering map of the jungle. Aline watched. She couldn't read the symbols, but she recognized urgency. He pointed to the screen. Then pointed to the sky. She leaned forward, eyes narrowing. Danger, she realized. Falling from the stars. James tapped his chest. Then pointed to the jungle beyond. He was going out there. Alone. Aline looked at the jungle. Then at the human. Then back. And she stepped forward. Two beings, one of flesh, one wrapped in steel, stood at the threshold of a dying world. Both had something to protect. And neither would face it alone. Humanity rises. The journey to the crash site began before sunrise. James Halden moved with practiced efficiency, every step of his armored boots calculated and quiet. Beside him, for the first time, walked another, Aline of the Kiraathi, light-footed but determined, her eyes fixed forward. She hadn't spoken a word he could understand. But she hadn't needed to. They traveled through a jungle still scarred from the storm. Trees split in half. Pools of acid steamed in low basins. Dead things littered the forest floor, creatures that hadn't made it through the last fallout. But overhead, the sky was clear. The orbital debris would come soon. A fragment of old Earth technology, once meant to relay light-speed messages across the stars, now twisted into a falling bomb. James checked his wrist pad again. ETA, 3 hours. Impact zone, 3 kilometers radius. Core status, unstable. If the fusion core ruptured when it landed, it would poison half the continent. The Kiraathi wouldn't survive it. He had one shot to disarm it. As they climbed a moss-covered ridge, Aline suddenly froze. Her antennae twitched, sensing movement. In a heartbeat, she ducked low and signaled, a sharp flick of her fingers toward a thicket. James raised his arm, eyes narrowing. Out of the brush came a pair of jungle stalkers, lean, six-limbed predators with acid-dripping fangs. They had followed the storm's scent and were hungry from the chaos. Aline hissed a warning and raised a sharpened shard of crystal, her only weapon. James didn't hesitate. He stepped in front of her and fired. The plasma arc burst from his gauntlet in a flash, searing the first creature mid-leap. The second fled, hissing, smoke trailing from its tail. Silence returned. Aline stared at him, half in fear, half in awe. He turned to her and simply said, "Stay behind me." She didn't know the words, but she followed. They reached the crash zone an hour later. The satellite had already torn a shallow trench through the jungle, its broken shell still hissing with cooling heat. Twisted panels jutted out like jagged wings. The fusion containment pod was half buried, blinking red through a crack in the casing. James dropped to his knees, opened his toolkit, and began the countdown in his head. 30 minutes. Aline stood back, unsure how to help, her mandibles clicking softly. Wires were fused. Coolant lines ruptured. The failsafes were decades out of spec. James worked like a surgeon, sweat rolling down his neck, hands moving faster than the HUD could track. He remembered something his old commander once told him, "Humans don't get miracles. We make them." So he did. He crossed 2 conduits that shouldn't touch. Used acid-resistant gel harvested from jungle plants to patch a reactor seam. Disconnected the backup coil and replaced it with a dampener coil he built from melted armor plating. 10 minutes. He took a breath. Then pried open the fusion capsule. It glowed faint blue. The hum of energy was louder than his thoughts. His fingers danced over the controls, sweat stinging his eyes. If he cut the wrong wire, it would detonate. He didn't even have time to be scared. Just focused. 5 seconds. Click. Silence. Then the lights faded. Power levels dropped to 0. The core went cold. James exhaled slowly, hands still hovering in the air. He'd done it. Back at the Kiraathi village, the storm damage was still being cleared. Word had spread of the stranger from the stars who had walked through the storm, saved a child, and stopped the sky from falling. When James and Aline returned, villagers gathered in silence. Mothers clutched their young. Elders bowed low. James said nothing. He simply nodded to Aline and turned to leave. But this time, she stopped him. She stepped forward and offered him something, a woven crest of silk and leaf, a symbol of life owed. He took it carefully, understanding its weight. "Why did you save us?" she asked softly, her voice nearly lost to the breeze. James looked at her. His voice was low, but steady. "Because that's what we do," he said. "We don't run. We don't quit. We protect." She didn't understand the words, but she understood the truth in them. As he vanished once more into the forest, the Kiraathi watched in silence. To them, the human was no longer just a legend. He was the promise of something greater, a fire thought lost, burning quietly in the ashes of a forgotten past. And now they knew. Humanity had not died. It had simply waited. And now, it was rising again.